Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a full solution, intake to archive. This session may contain forward-looking statements, and any trademarks in this presentation are not endorsements. Hi, everybody. I'm Cicero. I'm one of the product marketing readiness managers here in Smartsheet, and we're going to take you through a full solution today, going from the intake of a solution all the way through to the archive. That's what we want to cover in this session. The objectives for today, we're going to look at a solution through a wider lens. When you're done, I want you to see the whole picture of how this actually comes together. I want you to be able to describe each of those features and how those take part in this. And then just being comfortable putting it together. That's what I want you to come out of this with and see the exciting possibilities that you actually have with solutions in Smartsheet. We'll take a little bit of time talking about the solution. We'll then break down all of the parts. We'll talk about, after we bring that all together, where could we go after that? How do we take it to the next level? And then we'll just bring it together, and you're going to have a time for QA today. At the end of this session, we're going to have a live Q&A in our chat window, and during the whole session, we have the Smartsheet team available to you to answer your questions also in the chat window. Let's begin. How do we think about a solution? When you're looking at a solution, you tend to look at it in a tunneled view, but we want to look at it in a bigger view. See the whole thing right away. Don't start in one little piece, but what do you want to achieve? And we're going to start with a scenario that we have a project intake or a intake issue where it's just not working for us. We don't have a solution for this, and we need something. And that's what we're going to try to fix. So all solutions begin really with one thing, but we tend to do one of three things. We start fresh, just opening up a sheet. We can start from a template, one of the Solution Center templates, or we can import something from Excel, for instance, or project and go from there. But before that, don't do that first. That's second. First, you want to whiteboard this. Here's an example of the whiteboarding of that. Where you're seeing this, and I do this every time I'm going to create a solution. I do a whiteboard. And if I don't have a whiteboard, I use a piece of paper, but something that shows everything that I want to have happen. And it's more of just a brain dump, because you can see it's rather messy, but we're going to clean this up and put it together. But this identifies all of those things that we need to identify here in my solution. Multiple ways of submissions are coming in. I can't keep track. We've got no way to bring this all together in terms of what's happening, who's doing what. It's unclear what the assignments are for people. The project view is a mess because it's everywhere. And I don't have a way to bring this information together to my management, to the stakeholders. And I want all of this now to come together. And what I'm doing is what you see here in this drawing. All different kinds of things. Things need to come in, people need to be alerted, technicians need to be told, managers need to be told. All of these things have to happen in my solution. So let's clean that up. Now that we've drawn it on the whiteboard, we've gone through it, let's actually clean that up and look at what we're trying to do. We're trying to create an intake source, a single source of intake. We want to notify the office manager that something has come in, a new project or a new task. We want to get approval. In our scenario, we've got a single person that's going to approve. Okay, that has to happen before we start assigning people and so on. We need to notify the technician themselves that they've got new work, or the consultant, for instance. We want to have reminders built in so that people are always reminded that they have things that are due and when those due dates are taking place. And lastly, we want to have the submitter, the person who gives us that task or project, approve what we've done so that we know it has completed successfully. And breaking that all down, bringing that information that we need for the stakeholders and put it together in one place for them so they know what all is going on. That's what we're going to do. So taking that whiteboard picture, we cleaned it up, and this is what you see now. And it looks busy, but it's really not. What we have in here are 6 different steps. That's what we're going to talk about here. 6 steps that take you all the way from intake to the archive of that task, taking it all through. And so in here, you'll notice there are numbers in that drawing. We're going to step through each of those and talk about the features that are required for that and how those go together to make this work. All right, let's start breaking this down. The first, the intake. The intake is going to be the place that we want this to begin, and we're going to use a Smartsheet form. That form is what's going to drive all of this. So how do we set that up? The form you see, very simple. It's not that much information because in the collecting in the beginning of this, we don't want to give that person too many things to fill out, to have in. It's a poor experience for the consumer of that form. We can go back to them and ask them information. We can do all of these types of things as we go through this solution. But right now, we have some very specific things that we're going to be asking. Task name, explanation, the submitter email. Now, the submitter email is important because that's a contact list column. And when we have things in a contact list column, you can use that in automations to communicate with those people. We can send information or alerts or all of those things to those submitters using that contact list column. And then the last part, type. Type is going to be a column on my sheet, but type is broken down by department in this case. You can have it used for other things in there, but this is the deciding factor, and you're going to see why, because type drives part of this. Here's how it does it. When the form comes in, what I'm using type for is in an index match formula, a cross-sheet formula. And you'll see here that in the bottom, that information, consulting and the manager for each of those areas, that's kept up by somebody else. Could be HR, could be a business office, but that sheet, all I need is access to view it. And by virtue of that, I can have a cross-sheet formula that reaches out and goes to that sheet to find the appropriate manager. And that manager column is a contact list column. So I can use that going forward. So I don't have to do any of that. And what you'll see is that then is going to go populate for every row that comes in. And a good way to do that is to have that formula in a column row formula, which then it means everyone that fills through down there will be taken care of. So there's no issue. We always know it's going to work. And for those people who are looking at this and going, I'd rather use a VLOOKUP. I actually wouldn't. I love index match. And I'll tell you why. We do VLOOKUP and it works awesome. But when you do VLOOKUPs, you're actually using an entire range. And if somebody moves a column just in what they're doing, it will break the VLOOKUP. But with index match, that isn't the case. You can move columns, and because it's 2 distinct columns that it's looking at, you never have any issues. So it's quicker, it takes up less links, and it's a great way to do things like I'm showing. So as that form comes in, by virtue of it having the type identified, it immediately sends a message to that sheet to look at that sheet, go, oh, okay, it's this manager. Let's put that in that cell so that now we can drive the next thing. So just coming in, all of that already took place. Now, once that happens, look at this, all of that took place in just the first step. But the second step now is when things come in, we need to have the office manager know that, hey, tasks are coming in. But we don't want that manager to be overwhelmed with email and messages. So we're going to set that for daily. So at the end of the day, that manager can get a list of all those tasks or projects that have been submitted in that day. How do we do that? This is an automation. Automations are the thing that make this solution become a living thing, a process. And the first automation we have is the alert. The alert here, what you see is it's triggered when a row is added. It then runs. When does it run? It runs daily. So that it comes in at the end of every day, giving you a list, giving that manager a list. And if we look at that, in this case, I'm the specific person, but I could be the office manager. And you could even have 2 or 3 people on there if you wanted to, so that they're all aware of what was being submitted in that one day. And you can add information in the message of the email, however you want to set that up. But that's the beginning of this. Somebody now knows. They didn't have to look at the sheet to know. The alert told them. That's the key to that. All right, the next step. The next step, at that same time that we have the office manager's alert going out, but remember that was daily, we need to also get an approval. The submission comes in and somebody needs to decide, is this valid? Is this something we're going to do? Or, yeah, maybe not. Right? So that's where this is, and it's going to be an approval request. If we're looking at this flow, you see that from the sheet, the approval request gets generated, and it has 2 options. We have an approved, and then we have a not approved or declined. And something has to happen for each. When we look at this, what we see is if it gets declined, it sends a message using that contact list column for submitter email back to the person and says, I need more information. That's going to be an update request. Update requests are amazing because they don't have to have access to the sheet to fill out that information. We are giving them this spot permission to be able to do that. That's powerful. So they can have that. And the only thing we have to really think about in that is how do we know when they resubmit that? What is going to tell us that? And we'll talk about that when I show you how the automation gets put together. The opposite side of that is what happens with an approval. When the person who is doing this, that could be also the office manager or someone else, says, yep, we're going to be able to do this task or this project. Then we're going to have 2 different things happen. One is we're going to send a note back to that submitter and saying, hey, we're going to do what you asked for. Here might be an SLA that you include in that message, something to tell them, yep, we're good to go. You'll have it on the due date, whatever you submitted. And we're going to send an update request to the appropriate manager to assign the right technician. So now, because we know that manager from that index match formula, we can also now communicate with them to say, here you go, we just approved this. Now give us the right person to fit into that. And they may be keeping track with that in a different sheet with task sheets for those people. They could use the calendar view to reassign them. All of those things could be happening. But now that is another part that's taking place in here. So we've gone from the beginning, the intake, We've notified the manager, the office manager. Now we have sent the approval request, and so the task got approved and it's going to be moved forward. And this is how that looks. That approval request has a trigger, and you'll notice that that trigger has two parts. It has a condition built on it. It's either when a new row comes in, so it's automatically triggered on that submission of that form, or when resubmit is triggered or checked. So what that means is you have to create a checkbox so that you can let that person know when they're updating because they didn't do something that you wanted and that was declined, that when they check that and submit, it refires the approval. So that now they go, oh, they resubmitted it. I can approve this now. We're ready to go. That's what we start thinking about. And those are the little things that you think about when you're drawing that out. That's why you draw it, so you can see those what ifs and start planning for those. So the approval request always branches in two different parts. You've got your approved branch and you've got your declined branch. You'll notice that the two things on my approved branch are the update request to the manager, the appropriate manager, and you can see that that is a contact list column, the one we showed, and an alert. The alert back to the submitter to say, yes, it's approved, we're going to take care of you. Okay. On the decline, that's where that update request back to the submitter goes. And in that message of that, you would put, please check the resubmit so that it can go through the process again. And that's how we can move this through the system. All right, we're in the process now. People have been assigned. What happens? We have to tell that technician or the consultant or whoever that might be that you have another task coming. And that's where we're going to set this up. Now, what you notice in this drawing is that we have a notification going to the technician, but we also have a report here. And that report is going to be for that technician to know what they have that they have to take care of. So that's what's coming through to them. Now, how do we set that up? First, the alert. The alert to the technician that they have now been assigned a new task. The trigger, when a row is changed. Because remember, that's not on in, it's when it's changed. And what is changed? The assigned tech column. So you're going to want to have that contact list column also for a technician. Whoever gets assigned, that's who you want to then let know that you've got a new task coming. There are no other conditions that would be part of this, just that. And then in the message, what you notice, the way that I have it written is on the message, I actually put the link to the report that's going to show them the list of their tasks. So they don't even have to remember where that is or have it bookmarked. They just click on it and it opens up, and now they see that new task added to their existing workflow or their workload. All right, so that's how we set that up. We set that message goes to that technician, and then here's an example of the report that they'd be using in this. They would open that up from that link. The report has some unique things about it. First, you see how it's set up. The filters on the top are the way that we identify what source sheets we have, the columns that we want to display here, filter criteria. Now, that's the first part, the exciting part about this report. In the filters, on a contact list column, because remember, we want that technician to know that they've got a new thing to do, but we don't want everybody to see all of them. That makes a very messy report. We want it just to them. So in the filter, what we use is the current user. On the contact list column for the technician, you can filter it to the current user. And so any technician that opens up this report will see just those things they are assigned to. That's amazing. And it means that that one link on that alert that we sent out will always work for all those technicians. That's how this sets up. And you can see that I have it broken down now. I have it organized so that they can see what's assigned, all of those different areas that are in there, what the stage of those are. But the other thing about a report is it can be bi-directional, meaning what changes on the sheet dynamically changes on the report. Sure, that makes sense because now the technician knows they have a new assignment. But on my report, you see that I added task complete. They can use the report to check that box when they are finished so that it then is checking the box on the sheet to identify that that is done. And now we can use that as a trigger for the next step. So that's how we can do that because the report is bi-directional. So we can move that through to make that happen. All right. Now that technician, we're going to assume they're great, they're awesome, but everybody needs a reminder here and there. So we can set up a reminder for those technicians just to let them know that it's almost the due date for whatever task it is. But now we only want to tell them about the tasks that are not already completed, right? Once it's completed, we want that to, something else is going to happen. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But that's what we want to have driven. We're going to do that on the requested date, the requested due date, for instance. And so all of these columns that I'm starting to talk about, the different contact list columns and all of those things, those were all part of that big vision that I had when I was doing that whiteboarding, so that it was all part of that. So I knew when I was creating my sheet what I needed because I already drawn it out. I knew what was going to happen. But am I going to always get everything right? No, not necessarily. So you can add those things here. But that's part of this. If you go in comfortable knowing almost everything that's going to happen, this creation can be very fast and just amazing. So let's look at this now, this reminder. A reminder is like an alert, except it's driven by a date. And what you'll notice is it says when a date is reached. Now, the interesting thing about when a date is reached, if you think about it, I want to remind this technician before the date is due, not at the date. But you can do that with this. If you see on that setup, triggered on a date, what's the date? The requested date. But where you see next to run once is you can pick when does that happen. And when you use that drop down, you can actually see either before or after the date is when you want this to take place. You can do 1 day through 10 days, through a month, all of those different choices to when you want to be reminded of this. People use that too for things like when contracts need to be submitted or other parts like that. So the reminder on a date doesn't have to be just on that date. You can decide. And in this case, you see it's 1 day before. So give a little heads up. It's almost time this is going to do where you finished with this. All right? But we also added a condition. And the condition is when the submitter sign-off is declined. We're going to talk about that sign-off. That actually is going to come a little bit in the next phase of this, because that's going to be a drop-down column used in the approval. And when we have that here, that's what there are two instances where this technician will have to be working on this assignment. One, the original, hey, I'm finished, I'm going to check it, okay, that I'm done. But then the second is it went out to get approval from that submitter and they weren't happy. No, it's not done to the way that I want it. And so it got declined. in both cases, I want that to show up on their report, and I want that to show or to trigger these reminders. So if they've said they've finished it a week before the due date, it goes, they ask the submitter, nope, the submitter is not happy, they decline, it still shows up, and this still triggers a day before it is requested due. So we still keep track of those things for that technician. All right, next. Here's an example of the overdue report. This might be something that you have for the manager. The manager could be getting this information so that they can see what are all the things that we have to jump on, right? And now again, this could be something that is close to overdue. This could be something that has passed the overdue date. It's all about the filters that you set here on the report for these managers. And this manager report could also be a current user because we know what manager is there. And so that could drive this report. So you only have to make one report for the technicians and one report for the managers, and you're set, regardless of how many there are. And you also can see on my screen that I've used conditional formatting so that they stand out in red, and conditional formatting on a sheet will be pulled through onto your report. So it stands out there also. Because we're visual, conditional formatting makes things pop. And that's what this is doing. Red, in this case, is a bad thing. So we want to know what are those ones that are overdue. You see that the columns that I added were the assigned tech, so that I know who I need to discuss with. And that overdue reminder could also have been to the manager. So they're knowing something's coming that isn't finished, right? So that they're never hit blindsided. They've already been alerted of that. So that's how all of this can take place. And again, this is another type of report where we're looking at it, and I've broken it down in this case so that it's sorted and organized by the individual technician. The last piece here is getting the submitter sign off. So let's think about how everything that has happened so far. We had a form come in from the submitter, and this form could have been on a dashboard. It could have been just on a different website for people. You decide on that, but they submitted this form for a task or a project. That submission had a couple things happen. It used a formula to pick the right manager from a different sheet so that could be used going forward. At the same time, two different automations took place. The automation to let the office manager know things are coming in, and the automation for approval, which then resulted in a manager assigning the correct technician. On that assigning, another automation took place to tell that technician, hey, you've got new work, and provided them the report that they could use to see those things they have done and to interact with the sheet without going to the sheet, because reports are bi-directional. We also then added the reminder to make sure that those technicians know that things are coming, that the requested date is coming soon, and the manager potentially, so that they are also aware, they're not blindsided. And we gave that manager a report to actually see things that are overdue so they can deal with those things right away. And when only those things that are overdue will show up on that report. Now, the last part. The technician has finished that assignment. The consultant has finished that project. Whoever you have set up for this, they're using the report and they simply check the task is completed. Now they could add notes, you could have a notes column or things like that, but the main trigger is that checkbox. So the checkbox of task completed now drives this next thing. And the next thing is use the submitter email to go back to that person and ask them to approve what you've done. Now they can say, yes, it's good, or no, I really want to you to do some more work with it. And they can reply back, and that can then drive that. Now, the other part with that is, so that's the approval. Now, on the approval, they have two different parts. If the person declines it, what happens? If the person approves it, what happens? The decline we've talked about, that actually sends a message, is going to send a message back to the manager and technician to say, yeah, they're not happy, you need to do more. It doesn't remove it from the technician's report, and now they're going to be dealing with it. And you could do other things with that if you wanted to. But then on approval, what should happen? If that submitter is happy and that task or project is complete, we don't want that on our intake sheet. We could when it's marked complete, so if we filtered to things, we wouldn't see them. But I want to actually archive it. I want to take it from that sheet and I want to move it to a different sheet. And all of that is going to take place here in this approval request. So let's take a look at that. All right, for that approval request, the trigger you see is when a row is changed. And when a row is changed, the task completed is checked. That's what we have here. For the approval path, you see there are two different pieces with this. And one is that we want to alert the manager and technician. We want to tell them, hey, you did a great job, it's finished. Right? Because then they know it's not just sitting there. Until they get that message, we're waiting. We're waiting on that customer or the submitter. The other part of that approval request is the move row. Move row is another one of the actions in automations, and we're able to move it from the intake sheet to an archive sheet. So you would need to create that archive sheet. The archive sheet does not need to have any existing columns in it. It will automatically have the primary column. We know that because all sheets start with the primary column. Any other additional columns, and there's always 5 more columns on a new sheet, you can delete those because all of the columns on your intake sheet will carry through. What's in the primary column of the intake sheet will go in the primary column of your archive sheet, and all the other columns will then transfer across. So you can move that then into that area. So that then brings that around. Now, if it's declined, you see we have an alert. You could have different things happen with that also, but the alert in this case goes to both the manager and the technician, just like the approved did. But in this case, it's saying they're not happy. We need to fix this. And now the manager and the technician will work on whatever remediation needs to happen to make that person happy. And you could then potentially uncheck the task completed so that the next time they check that, it triggers this approval request again. You can have a number of different things that could go on with that. We'll talk about a bunch of those going forward. So now we've completed that last automation, and all of this is going together. And that whole solution, and if you think about that solution, we never had to open the sheet. The whole solution took place because of these 5 things that are on this screen. 5 automations that are driving this entire solution from intake all the way to archive. 5 things. That's amazing. So that, and you notice that I've got those arranged. I've named them by the number in this case, so it makes it very easy for me when I go in to see these, to understand what's happening, to understand the flow of my automations. That's why I've numbered them. So it makes it very clear for me to be able to see how those get passed through. And then lastly, which is far from not a crescendo, it is the crescendo. We are able to bring all of that information together, the metrics on who's doing what, how many things potentially are finished, all of those to the dashboard. That dashboard is where the managers, the Cs, whoever need to look to see what is going on. They don't need the day-to-day. The day-to-day happened through that whole solution, but the metrics of that are now brought in to the dashboard to complete it. So this is again what we did. We looked at this, and you have 6 steps that are going through this entire process. Step 1, the form. Step 2, tell the office manager. Step 3, an approval request, so that things you know if you're going to do it or not. And that approval request had 2 parts. It had what happens if I decline, what happens if it's approved. If it's approved, it then goes to the manager as an update request. The update request now has them apply a correct technician. And as soon as that happens, we go now to step 4. Step 4 was the technician gets made aware and given the link to the report that lists all of their tasks. So it's very quick and easy for them to see. The technician then is working on that project, but we've put in a reminder just in case, so that we know that that person is aware that a date is coming. But think about it. If that got to this level and the technician had already checked task complete, it would have bypassed step 5 and moved right to step 6. And if it was approved, that would be archived. It would never have to use step 5. Only 5 would trigger if that task did not get completed or was declined within the time of that requested date. So it's only going to be useful when it needs to be useful. And then we have step 6. Step 6 was the automation that got that approval. And once it's approved, we want to remove it, put it to that archive, and then we're going to grab all of that information. And you notice on my graphic here, between 5 and 6, there's a metric sheet. I'm using another sheet with cross-sheet formulas to just aggregate that data however I wanted to present it on my dashboard. That's where the metrics were pulled from. Could they be pulled from the sheet? Sure, absolutely. I like using those metric sheets to just bring that together. I didn't go into that because that you can kind of see where that happens, but that would be another thing that you could be adding to this. So what did we create? We created a request intake form, the new request notification, manager approval, the assistant notification, or the technician, an incomplete request reminder. So in other words, things aren't done yet. You need to get them done. Submitter approval, and the resource and metric dashboard. All those things to bring that solution together and deal with all the things that I pointed out in the beginning that I needed to have happen to make this solution work for me. That's what that was. So we did it. We did all of that. We brought this all together from intake all the way to archive. But now, hopefully your wheels are turning. You saw different automations. You saw how things can move between sheets. How could we go further? How could we take this to the next level? That's where we've got this. One way, a second approval. What if you had, instead of having the person check resubmit, maybe you create a second approval flow? That could happen when they submit that sheet, the trigger being whatever it is you wanted them to submit. You could add additional reports. You could have reports for sub-managers, for different regions, all of those different areas to make it more fitting for what they need. What is that person need to do their job, right? For dynamic work to take place, we can make dynamic reports that do that. You could also use our document builder. What if you wanted to have a PDF based on the information on some of those cells in that row from that technician? And you wanted to keep that on, maybe somebody needed a different file, something like that. With a fillable PDF, you could generate a document for that. That's another way to do it. Store it on the row or move it to a different place. Proofing. What if they needed to submit some sort of picture of what they wanted? You needed to go back and forth to them. We could use proofing to do that. And all of these different things that I'm covering here, all of this you can find in our help and so on. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. What if this needed to be bigger? What if that solution was for one office? And now we want to take that to the next level. What's the best way to scale this to 100 different offices? Control Center. Smartsheet's Control Center can start doing that on a regular process to make this whole solution scalable. You could add dashboards, more dashboards. You want to do a dashboard for every department, for instance. Give them more insight into that area, their area. You could add those to it. You could add calculations of time on task or how all of those different types of things. You could even take, now imagine this, when an intake came in where we said department or type, what if it moved the row then to the right department? Amazing. That can be added to this. And then you could also do integrations with Salesforce or Jira or other data to bring that information in to add to what you have for these tasks. All of those things together to make this a solution. And again, through that whole process, I never had to open that sheet again because it told me when things needed to be done, and we used automations to do it. So I never had to check anything on the sheet. That's what we had. So let's bring this together. Okay, we talked about a lot of things. Main things. Everything begins with a sheet. The sheet is the beginning. And the best way to start is to draw it out. You want to whiteboard this so that you can see what you really want to have happen. That brings that alive. The full solution went all the way from intake all the way to archive. And the components, the features that we talked about, forms, automations, cross-sheet formulas, column level formulas, reports, using current user in reports, dashboards. All of those automations, all of those things come together and we take all of those features and we put it together and create the diamond that is our solution. That's what we did. So hopefully you kind of see how all of this now fits together. So when you're hearing about an individual feature, you can go, oh yeah, I understand how I could put that into my solution. And lastly, I want you to leave knowing you have other places to go. We've got the Learning Center that has all types of information on it at your fingertips. We've got training and certification that you can go through to get products certified. And we also have amazing webinars. The Smartsheet automation webinars are fantastic and can take your knowledge to the next level on this. We did it all. We brought it together. We went from intake all the way to archive. Thanks for using Smartsheet, and make dynamic work happen.